The night sky glowed faintly with two moons hanging above the alien valley. Ethan, the human soldier, had wandered far from his unit, searching for water and rest. His boots pressed into the damp soil as strange insect-like sounds echoed in the distance. He stopped when he heard sharp cries, high-pitched voices filled with fear. His hand gripped the old rifle slung across his shoulder. He moved quietly through the tall grass until he saw it. A small village built of wood and stone, no bigger than a human farmhouse, but everything seemed shrunken. The huts were short, the doorways narrow, and the people, Ethan's eyes widened. The people were tiny. Half his height, thin but delicate, with glowing eyes and skin marked by faint patterns. They rushed about in panic. Fires spread across their homes, lit by raiders who towered over them. The raiders wore spiked armor and swung brutal weapons, their laughter cruel and loud. One of the small aliens, an elder with white strands of hair, shouted for the young to run. Children no taller than Ethan's knees scrambled for safety. A mother pulled her son toward the woods, but a raider's whip snapped, dragging them back. Ethan's chest tightened. He had seen battle before, but this was different. These creatures were helpless. They were too small to fight back. The soldier stepped forward, shadows hiding his face, until one of the raiders noticed him. "What's this?" the raider snarled. "A lost giant?" His voice carried mockery, but Ethan's silence was colder than steel. He unslung his rifle and aimed. The first shot cracked like thunder, dropping a raider to the ground. The tiny villagers gasped in unison, their glowing eyes turning toward the stranger. The remaining raiders roared and charged. Ethan fired again and again, but when the rifle clicked empty, he did not retreat. He swung it like a club, smashing against armored chests and helmets. Sparks flew, blood splattered the dirt, and his breath grew heavy. One raider swung a sword at his head, but Ethan ducked, caught the blade in his bare hands, and twisted until the steel snapped. The tiny aliens had never seen such raw power. Screams filled the night as the last raider fell. Ethan stood in the smoke, chest rising and falling, sweat shining on his skin. The villagers slowly stepped closer, their small feet crunching over broken weapons. A child peeked from behind his mother's skirt, whispering in awe, "Protect her!" Ethan knelt down, lowering himself to their height. "Are you safe?" he asked, his voice calm, though his hands were trembling with leftover rage. The elder with white strands approached, bowing deeply. "Great one, you saved us. Our people were finished, but you stood for us. Who are you?" "Just a man," Ethan muttered. He looked around at the burned homes and fallen raiders. His heart sank at the sight of the small bodies being carried by their kin. Even in victory, they had suffered. He could not walk away. The villagers gathered, murmuring to one another. Some touched his boots. Others stared with wide, shining eyes. The elder raised his staff high. "Tonight we do not mourn alone. Tonight we live, because the giant defended us." The crowd erupted in cheers, though their voices were small compared to human shouts. Still, it carried weight. Ethan tried to step back, uncomfortable with the attention, but they surrounded him. Children reached up to touch his hands, mothers wept in gratitude, and the elder's gaze grew sharp with a strange decision. The firelight painted the wrinkles on his face, and he nodded as if some old custom had returned. "You cannot leave," the elder said. His tone was respectful but firm. "To save us makes you one of us. Our laws demand it. You must be honored." Ethan frowned. "Honored? I don't need reward. Just rebuild. Stay safe." But the elder shook his head. "This is not a reward. It is tradition. You defended the small ones with the heart of a lion. By our law, you must be given what is most precious. You will not refuse." Confusion flickered in Ethan's eyes. He glanced at the villagers, who bowed their heads in agreement. A strange tension filled the night. The elder lifted his staff again and pointed toward the shadows. From the darkness, she stepped forward. A tiny figure, no taller than a child to him, but clearly not a child. Her skin glowed softly under the moonlight, her hair silver like flowing water, her eyes large and uncertain. She walked with hesitant steps, clutching a woven cloth around her shoulders. The villagers parted for her, bowing deeper than before. The elder's voice rang out like a hammer striking iron. "Here is Lyra, daughter of our line. From this night she is yours. She is your wife." The crowd cheered again, but Ethan froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. His breath caught in his throat as he looked at the small girl staring up at him, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with both fear and something else, hope. The fire crackled, smoke rising to the moons. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. A battle against raiders was one thing. This was something else. He had defended them with his rifle and fists, but now, standing in the glow of the burning huts, with every alien eye fixed on him, he realized the true shock was only beginning. Ethan stood stiff as the cheers faded into whispers. The small alien girl, Lyra, lowered her head shyly, her silver hair slipping over her shoulders. Her hands were clasped tightly, and she avoided his eyes as if afraid of rejection. The elder raised his staff once more, declaring, "By our bond, this is sealed. The protector shall not walk alone." The villagers bowed, some smiling, others clapping in their tiny way. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to deny, but the weight of 100 glowing eyes pressed on him. "I didn't ask for this," Ethan muttered under his breath, but even his quiet words seemed loud to the small ones around him. Lyra glanced up, her lips parting slightly, as though his voice had brushed against her heart. The elder approached him slowly. "Do not be troubled, giant. She is not burden but honor. She will care for you, guide you in our ways. Without this bond, we are strangers. With it, you are kin." Ethan's jaw clenched. He had faced warlords, bandits, alien beasts, yet he found himself lost in this moment. The girl was trembling, trying to appear strong, her large, luminous eyes fixed on him. If you do not want me," she whispered, her voice fragile, "say so, and I will return to the shadows." The silence that followed was heavy. The villagers gasped, some shaking their heads in disbelief that she would even suggest refusal. A boy tugged at Ethan's boot, pleading, "Don't send her back. Please. It is our way." Ethan rubbed his face, frustration running deep. He never wanted to hurt them, but the thought of being tied to someone who was barely the size of his waist seemed absurd. Yet when he looked at Lyra again, he saw not just a girl forced upon him, but someone ready to sacrifice her dignity so he would not feel trapped. That quiet bravery struck harder than any blade. Before he could answer, a horn blew from the distant ridge. The sound was sharp, angry, and it rolled down into the valley like thunder. Panic spread instantly. Mothers clutched their children, warriors no taller than Ethan's thigh rushed for their spears, and the elder's face darkened. "The raiders return," he said grimly. "They tasted blood, and now they want more." Ethan's hand instinctively went to his empty rifle. The villagers looked to him, their new protector, their giant, their hope. Lyra stepped forward, fear glimmering in her eyes, yet her small fingers reached for his arm. "Do not leave us," she whispered. "If they take me or my people, no bond or law can save us." Her touch was so light he could barely feel it, but her words burned heavier than the armor of the raiders. He glanced at the villagers, scared but willing to fight with whatever little strength they had, and then back at the trembling girl who had just been given to him as wife. His heart pounded as the horn sounded again, closer this time. Smoke from the earlier battle still lingered, curling upward like ghosts. Ethan stood tall, pulling the broken sword he'd claimed from a fallen raider. His voice was calm, but filled with fire. "Then we fight, together." The villagers erupted in cheers, though fear still shook their voices. Lyra's eyes widened, and for the first time her lips curved into a faint smile. It was small, uncertain, but it was enough to tell Ethan that whatever madness he had walked into tonight, turning away was no longer possible. The bond may not have been of his choosing, but the battle ahead would be, and in that battle he would stand for them again, no matter the cost. The village was alive with hurried movement, torches flickering against rebuilt fences and sharpened wooden stakes. Ethan sat near the central fire, watching the tiny aliens carry buckets of water, stack rocks for barricades, and whisper prayers in their own tongue. Every eye glanced at him with both awe and expectation, as if he was not just a man, but the wall between them and death. He hated that weight pressing down on him. Lyra knelt beside him, carefully wrapping strips of cloth around his scratched hands. Her touch was soft, cautious, yet her eyes carried a quiet fire. "You bleed because of us," she said, her voice low. "Our law says I belong to you now, but I will not let you carry all pain alone." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, pulling his hand back. "You don't belong to me," he replied firmly. "I didn't come here to take a wife. I came because I couldn't stand watching those raiders burn your homes." His tone was heavy, but Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened, her silver hair glowing in the firelight, Her gaze locked on his with surprising boldness. "If you refuse me, you refuse them," she said, nodding toward the people working tirelessly around them. "We are bound by tradition. To deny me is to deny the village." Her words cut sharper than any blade. Ethan turned his head, jaw tightening. He didn't care for laws or customs, but when he looked at the villagers, children smiling nervously at him, mothers bowing their heads, warriors saluting despite their fear, he knew she was right. They needed him to accept what he didn't want. A horn echoed again in the distance. The sound was closer, carried by the wind. The raiders were not giving them time to breathe. Lyra stood, her small frame tense but unshaken. She carried a spear almost taller than herself and gripped it with both hands. Ethan stared in disbelief. "What do you think you're doing?" "I fight," she answered simply. "You'll die," he snapped. Her eyes softened, but her chin did not lower. "Then I die beside my husband." The word hit him like a punch. He had never accepted it, never spoken it, yet she said it with unshakable certainty. Around them, villagers nodded, approving of her courage. Ethan rubbed his face, exhaling slowly. "You're too small for war." "Small is not weak," she whispered. "Did you not see us rebuild in the shadow of fire? Did you not see children carry stones heavier than their arms?" Her voice wavered, but not from fear, only from determination. The horn sounded again, and the earth trembled with approaching footsteps. The air grew thick, heavy with smoke and tension. Ethan rose to his full height, towering above them, gripping the broken sword like a promise. He looked down at Lyra, her luminous eyes staring up at him, her lips pressed tight, but her spirit blazing. For the first time, he did not see her as a fragile burden forced on him by tradition. He saw her as part of the fire keeping this village alive. The raiders' shadows spilled over the ridge, torches burning in their hands. Ethan raised the broken blade high and growled through clenched teeth. "If it's war they want, it's war they'll get." Lyra stepped to his side, planting her spear in the ground. The villagers gathered behind them, hearts pounding, ready to follow their giant protector and the girl who now dared to stand beside him. The night no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to the fight that was about to begin. The night exploded with fire and steel as the raiders poured into the valley. Their torches lit up the huts like dying stars, and the ground shook under their boots. Ethan stood in front of the barricade, every muscle tight, the broken sword gripped so hard his knuckles turned white. Behind him, the tiny aliens braced themselves with spears, slings, and sharpened sticks. Their small hands trembled, but their eyes burned with a courage born of desperation. The first raider charged, laughing at the sight of the miniature defenders. His laughter ended when Ethan's blade cleaved across his chest, throwing him to the dirt. Blood splashed, screams followed, and chaos erupted. The villagers struck with their small weapons, darting between legs, cutting straps, stabbing at unguarded flesh. Ethan swung like a storm, his blows smashing through shields and helmets. But for every raider that fell, more came. Lyra darted beside him, her spear flashing like silver in the firelight. She was fast, weaving between enemies, stabbing at knees and ankles. Ethan caught sight of her in the blur of battle, her face determined, her hair glowing under the flames. He wanted to shout for her to run, but she would not leave. She stood close, watching his back, striking when an enemy slipped past his reach. A raider twice her size raised a club to crush her. Ethan roared, lunging forward, but Lyra struck first. Her spear pierced the raider's thigh, sending him howling. Ethan's blade finished the job, cutting him down. Lyra met his eyes for a heartbeat, her chest heaving, and he saw something fierce in her, something that refused to be broken. The fight dragged on. Ethan's arms ached, his breath grew ragged, but he kept moving, kept killing. Blood painted his clothes, smoke filled his lungs, and still the raiders pressed forward. A heavy axe tore across his side, sending pain ripping through him. He staggered, his vision swimming. Another raider raised his blade for the finishing strike. Before it could fall, Lyra leapt in front of him. Her small frame stood against the massive figure, her arms spread wide, her voice ringing out, "You will not touch him!" The sword stopped inches from her head as Ethan surged up with a roar, driving his broken weapon straight through the raider's chest. The body collapsed at Lyra's feet. Ethan dropped to one knee, clutching his bleeding side. His strength was fading, his heartbeat pounding like drums in his ears. Lyra fell beside him, her small hands pressing against his wound, tears streaking down her face. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You cannot leave now, not after you gave us hope." The villagers screamed in anger and grief, rallying around their protector. They fought harder, slings cracking, spears stabbing with wild strength. The raiders, shocked by the fury of the tiny people and their towering human, began to falter. Ethan's vision blurred, but he forced himself up again, swinging his sword with one last surge. Every strike felt like fire, but he refused to fall, not while the villagers and Lyra stood behind him. The raiders pulled back at last, dragging their wounded into the night, cursing the giant who would not die. Silence fell heavy over the valley, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the groans of the injured. Ethan dropped to the ground, blood soaking his side, his chest rising and falling shallowly. Lyra held him tightly, her tiny arms wrapping around his massive frame, her face pressed against him as if her embrace alone could hold his life in place. The villagers gathered in a circle, their small faces lit by firelight, their voices rising in trembling chants. They called him protector. They called him kin, and in their eyes shone both fear and worship. But Ethan barely heard them. His world was narrowing to the pain in his body and the small, trembling figure clinging to him, whispering again and again, "You cannot leave me. Not now. Not ever." Ethan woke to the faint warmth of a fire and the soft weight of tiny hands pressing against his wound. His breath came slow and heavy, but he was alive. Around him, the villagers worked silently, tending the injured, gathering what little food and water remained. Their eyes kept flicking toward him, the giant who had nearly bled out to protect them. But it was Lyra who never moved from his side. Her silver hair was damp with sweat, her face pale from exhaustion, yet her hands never stopped pressing herbs into his wounds, binding the cloth tighter, whispering words in her language that sounded like prayers. "You fought like a mountain," she whispered when she saw his eyes open. "But even mountains fall without roots to hold them." Ethan tried to sit, pain ripping through his side, but she pushed him back down with surprising strength. "Rest. You are not only yours now, you are ours." The words caught him off guard. He had heard her call him husband in the heat of battle, but now, in the stillness after the storm, it sounded different, real. The villagers came closer, kneeling around him. An elder woman touched his boot and said, "She is more than a gift. She is proof you belong here. She did not run. She chose you when the blade was at her neck." Ethan looked at Lyra. She dropped her gaze, but he saw the truth in her trembling shoulders, the dirt on her cheeks, the stubborn light in her eyes. She had shielded him when she could have hidden. She had bled her strength into him when he was too weak to stand. She wasn't just a symbol forced on him by tradition. She was alive, fierce, and bound herself to him without fear of death. He reached for her hand. It was small, fragile, but it gripped his in return as if she had been waiting for him to choose. "Then I accept," he said softly, almost to himself. Her eyes widened, shining like stars, and the villagers let out cries of joy. The word spread quickly. The bond is true. And for the first time, the valley felt alive again, not with fear, but with hope. Yet that hope trembled when a scout burst into the firelight, panting, blood on his clothes. "The raiders," he gasped. They gather all of them, a horde. They will burn us all before dawn." Fear swept through the villagers like wind through dry grass. Children clung to their mothers. Warriors gripped their spears with shaking hands. The elder's face hardened, but his voice wavered. "If they strike with all, we cannot stand." Ethan pushed himself upright, ignoring the burning pain in his ribs. "Then we don't wait for them," he said. His voice cut through the panic like steel. "If they're gathering, we strike first. We take the fight to their camp before they drown this valley in fire." The villagers stared at him, stunned. No one had ever spoken of fighting the raiders beyond defense. It was madness to them. But Lyra's face lit with fierce resolve. She rose to her feet, spear in hand, her voice steady. "He is right. We do not wait for death to come to our homes. We go with him. We end it." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some shook their heads in fear, but others lifted their weapons higher. They had seen the human fight. They had seen their own courage bloom beside his. Slowly, voices rose in agreement. Ethan's body ached, but when he saw Lyra step forward, planting herself at his side with unwavering eyes, his chest filled with fire. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low but certain. "Then it's decided. Before dawn we march, and together we finish this." The fire cracked, sparks rising into the night, and for the first time since he had entered this valley, Ethan felt the bond not as a chain of tradition, but as a promise. A promise he had chosen and one he would fight to keep. The forest beyond the valley was thick with fog, the kind that muffled sound and turned every shadow into a threat. Ethan moved at the front, his broken sword gripped tight, his body still aching but his steps firm. Behind him, the tiny aliens marched in silence, their torches dimmed, their weapons clutched nervously. Lyra kept close to his side, her silver hair damp with mist, her small spear steady in her hands. She had refused to stay behind, and now her eyes burned with the same fire that lived in his chest. They reached the ridge overlooking the raider camp. Dozens of fires burned below, circles of tents surrounding a massive iron cage where prisoners cried faintly. Raiders laughed around the flames, sharpening blades, their shadows long and careless. The sight made Ethan's stomach twist. "They think you're weak," he muttered to the villagers gathered at his back. "They'll never see you coming." He crouched low, drawing rough lines in the dirt with his blade. "Hit from 3 sides, fire their supplies first. Chaos will do half the work. Stay fast, stay sharp, and don't break." The villagers nodded, their small hands gripping spears tighter, courage flickering like kindling about to ignite. Lyra watched him, her gaze unwavering. "And you?" she asked softly. "I'll draw their attention," he answered without hesitation. Her lips parted as if to protest, but then she only whispered, "Then I'll draw it with you." The attack began with fire. Slings launched burning stones into tents, baskets of oil were hurled onto wagons, and suddenly the raider camp roared with flames. Shouts of confusion filled the air as the tiny aliens swarmed from the trees, stabbing, cutting, striking with speed that the larger warriors couldn't match. Ethan charged into the chaos like a storm unleashed, his broken sword tearing through armor, his fists crushing helmets. The raiders tried to surround him, but every time one lunged, a villager stabbed low at their legs or a slingstone cracked against their heads. Lyra was everywhere. She darted between giants, her spear flashing, her voice sharp as she called to her people, keeping them together. Ethan caught glimpses of her, hair wild, eyes blazing, moving with a courage that made his chest ache. A massive raider, taller than any he had faced, strode forward with a double-bladed axe. He bellowed a challenge, swinging with force enough to split a tree. Ethan blocked with his sword, the clash ringing like thunder, but the blade snapped in two. The axe swung again, and Ethan barely dodged, the ground splitting where he had stood. The giant raised the axe for the killing blow, but Lyra appeared from nowhere, her spear plunging into the raider's side. He roared, spinning to swat her like an insect, but Ethan surged up with a roar of his own, tackling the brute to the ground. Fists and broken steel hammered again and again until the raider stopped moving. Ethan stumbled to his feet, blood dripping down his arms, his breath ragged. Lyra grabbed his hand, pulling him upright. "Together," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. He met her eyes, and for a moment the battle vanished. She wasn't a gift forced upon him anymore. She was his strength, his bond, his partner. The raiders broke under the assault. Their camp burned, their leaders slain, and the prisoners were freed. The tiny villagers chased the last of the enemy into the dark, their shouts ringing with triumph instead of fear. When silence finally returned, Ethan stood in the middle of the ruins, chest heaving, the firelight painting his face in gold and shadow. The villagers gathered around him and Lyra, their voices rising in chants. They no longer looked at him as an outsider. They looked at him as kin. The elder stepped forward, eyes gleaming with pride and something more. "You fought not for reward, but for us. You bled, and she bled with you. From this night, you are bound not by law, but by choice. Our people are your people." Lyra squeezed his hand tighter. Ethan looked down at her, her small face smeared with ash and sweat, her eyes still shining with fire. For the first time, he didn't feel the shock of being given a wife he never asked for. Instead, he felt the weight of something far greater, a future he had never expected, but one he would not trade for anything. The village pulsed with life in a way Ethan had never seen before. Fires burned not with fear but celebration, filling the valley with warmth instead of smoke. Children ran between the huts, singing songs of victory, their tiny voices rising like bells. Warriors displayed the broken weapons of the raiders as trophies, holding them high for all to see. And at the center of it all sat Ethan, a giant among them, his body scarred but his spirit alive, the weight of silence in his chest replaced with something he had not felt in years: belonging. Lyra sat close beside him, her silver hair catching the firelight, her small frame leaning against his arm as though she had been there all her life. She said little, but her presence spoke louder than any word. The villagers treated her not only as his wife by law, but as the one who had fought beside their protector, the one who had stood in front of death and not flinched. Wherever she walked, heads bowed with respect. The elder raised his staff, and the crowd hushed. This night marks the end of fear. Our enemy has fallen, our homes stand, and our kin are safe. But more than this, we are no longer alone. The giant is one of us. He is no wanderer, no stranger. He is bound to us through fire and blood, and through her. His staff pointed toward Lyra. She carries the bond, and together they carry our future. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but when he saw Lyra's eyes glisten, not with fear but with pride, he didn't protest. He let the words wash over him. Cheers erupted, tiny fists raised high, chants of his name filling the valley. Ethan looked out at the sea of glowing eyes and realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped being an outsider. Later, when the noise dimmed and the fires turned to embers, Ethan sat alone at the edge of the village, staring up at the twin moons. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man's thoughts louder. He felt a light touch on his hand and looked down to see Lyra sitting beside him, her legs tucked beneath her, her gaze soft. "You could have left us," she whispered. "No law held you here, but you stayed. You fought. You chose." Her small fingers tightened around his, fragile yet unyielding. "That is why I will never leave you. Not in war, not in peace, not ever." Ethan swallowed hard, the words catching in his chest. He had seen soldiers die, cities burn, promises break. Yet here in this valley of small people, with this girl who barely reached his waist, he felt something unshakable. He turned his hand to clasp hers fully, his voice low but steady. "Then I'll stay. Not because of law, not because of duty, but because you make me want to." Lyra leaned against him, her head resting against his arm. For the first time since he had set foot in this strange place, Ethan allowed himself to breathe without the weight of loneliness. The valley was no longer just a refuge for tiny aliens. It was his home. And the girl beside him, the one he had once seen as a shock, now felt like the only truth he wanted to hold. The firelight flickered across the village, and the people sang late into the night, their voices carrying into the sky. A human soldier who had stumbled into their world had become their protector, their kin, and, through a bond he never expected, their family. And as Lyra's hand stayed wrapped in his, Ethan knew the fight had given him something worth more than victory. It had given him a place where he was no longer alone.